acostarse con tu voz, a medirse en tus manos y apoyarse en tu sudor. Borrará duras muecas pintadas sobre un frágil cartón de silencio y el aliento de murga saldrá a redoblar.
Welcome to Poetry, Exile and Resistance. My name is Amir. I'm gonna skip the introduction. Guys, Mohsen, guys. Guys, yourselves.
Thanks everybody for being here. I want to speak of something a bit complicated in the sense of the theory of poetry. But I try to find a way to describe it the way that we can all feel in a way. So I try to use a logic of allegory instead of using the logic of the normal reasoning. I do believe that the normal reasoning way that you express an idea and then you put that an idea connected to another idea and then that way, which is very common in the Greek philosophy and all the currents after that so-called Western philosophy, is something more acceptable in most European communities. But I try to avoid that for different reasons. I'm trying to use a logic of the allegory, which was another way of the reasoning, which was very common after Troy, or before Troy. For years I'm writing essays about poetry and the phenomena of poetry and the relation between poetry and exile, the relation of the poetry and translation, relation between poetry and resistance, which has relation with the fact of the definition of poetry from the point of view of the Troy to Japan. So I try to go from the Troy to Japan, and I avoid from Athens to Rome. Okay, that's my way. And for going that way, I do not use the statement way of the reasoning which is very common in the philosophical approach, which is happening in many other figures like Derrida, like Deleuze, or many other Western philosophers. So I go through using allegories, which was very common tradition in Iran, which was very common tradition in Balkan, which was very common tradition for Japanese, Zen, Buddhist, and other figures of the Korea and many other parts of the, outside of the Troy. So my way goes through that way. And for that, I constructed a model of the allegories, and I try from that. Try to use those things. I guess that my computer has some problem, but I try to, it's going to shut down, but it doesn't matter. I start from a conception called reality and a conception called text, that is called literature or that is called language, and the interference between these two. One of the oldest texts that I read years ago was a Persian national epic called Shahnameh by Ferdowsi. But I never actually focused on the text of Shahnameh. I had an attitude of my own master, Ahmad Shamlu. He was against the Book of the Kings, and he was trying to find a way to go escaping from that book. So I myself tried to look at the book through the folkloric stories around that book, not the similar text, the text itself. So what I did is that I started reading the folkloric story around that book. And one of the most interesting folkloric stories that I found about the construction of that book is that how that book had been written. I focus on that concept of writing a national epic, you know. And the book is written this way, that according to the history, Ferdowsi, who was a great figure of the Persian literature, for many Iranians, who was the savior of the Persian language, I don't believe that. But he asked the king that, in the folklore story, he asked the king that if I can stay in a castle, and if there is a possibility that the castle be completely closed by a circle, and I could stay inside the castle, write the book, and then come out. And after that circle, everything is dangerous. So I ask that nobody could put his feet inside or her feet inside that circle. So they gave him a castle. The poet is sitting inside that castle and is writing his own book. At that period, it's said that the son of the minister of the time was curious that what's happening inside the castle. So he came to do an investigation and came inside, passing the circle, and enters to near the castle. And from the air, an arrow comes and kills him. And he stayed dead inside after the circle. And this Anjavi Shirazi, a great Iranian folklorist who collected these stories, I do not speak of myself, I speak of the narration of the story, of the writing Shahnameh by Anjavi Shirazi. So after that, the day after, the daughter of the minister comes to see that what's happened to his brother, who came curiously to see that about, to know something about the process of the writing the book. And she enters the circles, and from the sky comes a lot of the jewels, the golds comes to her. She collect the body, collect the golds, and go out. 30 years later, as is said of the process of the writing of Shahnameh, the poet meet the king, the poet meet the minister, and the minister ask about the death of his own child. And Ferdowsi, the poet, explained that way, that it seems that your son came at the time that there was a war happening between it was the process of the war between the Rostam fighting, the heroic figure of the text, fighting against the devils, or we call it divs, div of the northern Iran, my region.
Yeah.
And at that moment, from the sky was coming a lot of arrows, and one of these arrows attacked him, and he died. But your daughter arrived the time that the war ended. Rostam was the winner, and they were, sharing the benefit of the war. So golds came to her. So I just stop on that story and I ask, where is the reality and where is the text? How the text can kill a person with an arrow? And I take this and I go to another stage. Okay, this is the way of approaching to the logic of writing through allegories instead of using the normal, way. So I took that and I go to the another approximation or approach to the text. So it seems that the text has the possibility to interfere inside the reality according to this folk story. But what is the reality in itself? And in Spanish per se or in C. Yeah. There is one of the most interesting books written in the Persian history is a book called Ajaib al-Makhluqat, the Book of Marvels. This book is written in 12th century in the medieval period. It's written in one of the most interesting region of Iran, Hamadan, which is one of the cities which has an old, very old history in of the civilization, empires, empire and things like that, which is before Gamoneda and other empires happening there. And at the same time, is a city looking at the earth from very top, very high. It's a very, high from the height, city. It's a huge height. So in that city, in the period of the Silk Road, a guy, which probably doesn't have any interesting book more than this book, collected folk stories and folk narrations of the Silk Road, as imagination of the Silk Road, about different parts of the world. The same fact that brought Columbus to America, and the fact that Columbus came to America because of a mistake. We have to consider that it's a textual mistake that bring Columbus to America, because he was thinking that the earth is flat. So because of that, he came by mistake to America. So I want to stop in the moment of Columbus and read another book of the medieval period called the Book of Marvels. In that book, the whole geography is defined differently. What we know of Andalusia, for example, what we know of China, for example, what we know about cities that I never heard of their name exist in that book. And they are marked clearly on the geography. So I stop there and see that what is the reality there? Just imagine that Andalusia, according to this book, is a city that is not a region, is a city. That when you come close to that city, you hear the voice of dogs barking and barking and barking. And when you enter to that city, the voice of the dogs barking will vanish. So you don't hear any dogs barking. Or in Andalusia, there is a mountain that if you broke any stone on it, you will see the face of a panther inside the stone. And if you use that stone on the body of human being who have been wounded by a panther, that stone will cure the wound of a panther. Or there is a part of Andalusia that everybody speaks 72 languages. So it's very funny for many people, It's completely funny. But it was accepted as a part of the reality of the geography at that time. The same mistake or the same reality accepted by Columbus, who takes him to America. So there is a textual reality which is completely different from the factual reality existing in us, what actually governs our mind. In that sense, in that case, I speak about a conception of nature and text. In which extents the reality we believe, which is true, the reality which we believe that is factual for us, for Hamadani in the medieval period, those information were factual, according to the travelers to Andalusia, according to travelers to China or other places. They were factual, so he collected it. He was surprised, but he collected those facts. You know, according to which extent, to which facts, those sort of the reality that we daily are living are fictitious, and which part are, real. So here we come to question about something called reality, where reality resides, where language resides in relation with reality. So I start my research about poetry most of the time in all my career somehow in a context of the questioning these questions: nature, reality, poetry, and text. So I go to the question of the nature in itself. What we call it, in that time, the nature of Andalusia has been defined in those texts or in the belief of the people or travelers of the Silk Road that way. I don't believe that, for example, the Sandbad stories in the 1001 Night are coming from the pure imagination. It's not correct. Most of the time they comes from a mixture of the imagination and the belief about an understanding about reality. So the nature itself, I say that the nature is a textual phenomenon. I don't speak how the plants think about me. I speak how I see the plants. That is to say that I am speaking about human subjectivity, looking at objects. I'm not speaking that how the subjectivity of the plants or the subjectivity of animals looking at me. So nature, in the sense that we understand, I speak in that epistemology. I don't go to the nature of the plants speaking to me. I don't have access to that. So the nature, the way that we understand as human being, is in a way textual phenomenon. For me, it happened in several occasions in my life to understand the nature in textual phenomenon. For example, I entered from the Iran to Finland first time. And in Finland, the trees were high, very high, and I couldn't understand what does it mean to stay in a place that this sort of the high trees exist. And for me, it was somehow I could not name them as tree. When I was writing my poetry, parts of it was impossible because the fact that these trees or many birds existing there or many other definition of the nature existing there for me were unnameable, because my experience of childhood named them differently. So I tried to think that how much of my experience of the nature itself is textual. And there I remember the time that through reading Finnish poetry, through translating Finnish poetry, I little by little come to the position to understand a Finnish tree. What does it mean, that tree? Finns have a lot of words for snow. And when I was translating Finnish poetry to Persian, at that time, I worked on around 62 Finnish poets. And when I was translating them to Persian, I discovered that I don't have words with this. In Persian, we have one word for snow, which is barf. Okay, but we don't have that much words for snow. This type of snow, that type of snow, that type. So what I have to do with that? What sort of the nature exists there which is unreachable to me because of my language? The main question was that my language was stopping me to see all the differences of the snow existing. The Finns were able to understand the differences, but I myself, because of the limitation of my language, was completely unable to understand that. So I start to fight against my incapabilities, and all my life I am fighting against my incapabilities. You know? So I start to think that, so where the word snow, for example, is created, and how the word snow is being created. I go to another allegory system. You know? I come to a very old story about a Japanese story that a grandfather is sitting with his kid in a house, and they two are speaking together, and the kid asks his grandfather that, grandfather, what is the most horrible creature in the world? And the grandfather says that, I guess that a wolf would be the most horrible creature in the world. And accidentally, at that night, there was a wolf in the stable of the house waiting to eat the dear horse of the grandfather. And after a few minutes, the grandchild asked the grandfather that, what is the most horrible creature of the world, more than a wolf? And the grandfather thinks and says that, I guess that a thief could be the most horrible, a ladron or thief could be the most horrible phenomenon of the world. So at the same time was a thief waiting in this stable to rob the horse of the grandfather. And it was a rainy day, a rainy night, and it was raining. And from the roof was leaking some drops of water. And the grandchild asked the grandfather, what is the most horrible phenomenon of creature of the world? And the grandfather says that, looking at the roof, and says that, leak. So at that moment, the wolf in the stable and the thief in the stable, both were, the thief was first very happy that he is very important and very dangerous and very, fearful phenomenon. And at the same time, the wolf was happy that he is very dangerous and fearful phenomenon. And then hear something that never heard about it, lick. So what is a lick? It doesn't exist in the vocabulary of the wolf and the thief. And at the same moment, every movement, they knew about their own ego and their own power. At the same time, every movement of any phenomenon in the world could give them any sense of the presence of an animal, non-existent animal, or they don't know about him, called lick. Okay, so suddenly some wind or something like that produce a noise, and the wolf start running, and then the thief start running, and the thief run on the back of the wolf, and they go to the forest. The thief thinks that he is on the back of Lick, and the wolf thinks that the Lick is in his back, and they run to the forest. And the beautiful Japanese story goes to the fact to speak about the distribution of the fear in the whole forest. So I stop here. First, what is the reality of Lick? They are too true to produce fear in each animals. They are this phenomenon, non-existent phenomenon, is also true to distribute the fear to the whole forest. and at the same time, it's not doesn't exist. And at the same time, there is another. We don't know about the origin of that words, how it have been created. Wolf doesn't know about the origin or the birthday of that word. The same way the thief doesn't know about the origin and the birth of that word. So many words that we are using and they create another realities. We are unaware about their existence and how they have been created. I can tell about one thing that, for example, the Portuguese are using it, about a word that Portuguese are using it as a part of their identity definition, which is the word saudade. For me, it was a very curious question because years ago, when I was making a film about Exile of the Luis Cernuda in Mexico, I interviewed a very interesting and wonderful Latin American critic called Eduardo Milan about Luis Cernuda, and he mentioned saudade. He said that saudade probably doesn't have any translation to Spanish. When I hear this word that something doesn't have any translation to any language or any other language, I actually start to question it. Most of the time, I don't accept the impossibility of translation. I start from that. I start from the fact that the translation is possible. Then I come. If it's impossible, I come to that. But most of the time, always in my life, I started from the possibility of translation. So I questioned Eduardo on that fact. So I started to think that where I can find a translation of the when I made a film about Shamlu at that time, Iranian writer, called the blues song, La Canción Azul or Tarane Abi in Persian. I used part of the interview of Eduardo, and there I subtitled Saudade in Latin, and I wrote it Saudade. Then I started working on that words later in somehow academic way, and I saw that there is a myth among the Portuguese that word is untranslatable. And then I read some texts that they are connecting, some linguists are connecting that word to an Arabic word called sauda. Sauda means black in Arabic. Then I came from that to think about Avicenna, and in Persian Ibn Sina. And in Ibn Sina, he used that word sauda to describe melancholia. He used that sauda to describe melancholia in this way, that he says that the liver turned black by melancholia. According to the Greek system, he used that. So the word he used to translate the Greek medicine to at that time he was writing in Arabic, was to use the word sauda, which means black. Okay, but what happens in Persian literature is completely amazing. The whole poetry of Sadi, the whole poetry of the many parts of the Nizami or many of other great figures of the Persian literature has something to do with the word sauda, which exactly with the definition of melancholy, not with the definition of the blackness. I understand all the metaphorical elements of the being black and being metaphoric, but in Persian literature have been used that way. Then what I realized there is that we forget the connection Iran had with Portugal. It's a very crazy connection, but the Portuguese attacked Iran in 15th century, around end of the 16th century, end of 15th century. And they attacked Iran, and what happens there is that they occupied south of Iran. The same person, somehow, who organized the attack of Brazil is Albuquerque. He also organized the attack of the south of Iran, and the south of Iran was nearly 100 years, a century under the Portuguese occupation. The word Sauda first time was used around 12th century, in the end of the 12th century something, 1260, in Portuguese by a priest, first time. But it never turned to be popular there. But after the occupation of the south of Iran, the word turned to be popular in defining the identity of the Portuguese in Portugal, at the same time in Brazil. It has a lot of so when you speak with the Portuguese, many of them, after I published that essay, was angry of the fact that I found something called origin on that. I want to focus on that and go to another dimension. For that word was origin lost. The same way that Liklik was origin lost in that story of the grandfather. That word in the Portuguese literature played an important role, the same way that the same word in another dimension plays an important role, still in Persian literature, Sauda. But what happens there is that we cannot connect one origin to another origin. All those origins are lost. So I started another process to challenge the conception of origin. One of the things that in the books of the language learning makes me angry, and truly angry, is that a person asking me, where are you from? Okay. That question simply has something to do with a metaphor called metaphor of origin. How can I define who am I through an origin which I accidentally was born there? I guess that I never am able to do that. So I started fighting with that fact. In the process of the translations or things like that, I started to challenge the metaphor of origin. I guess that metaphor, if we start to challenge it, we come to challenge many other people. First of all, Platon. Plato must be challenged there because he believes a lot into the original or the origin or the authenticity or things like that. I don't believe on that, because even in the creation of the word, like Liklik, like Saudade, like many others, the origin is lost. Even though I myself try to put that Portuguese concept inside, and attach to that Persian word, it just provide a translation. That is to say that from one word to another word, we come to a translation. I never claim that the origin of the Saudade is Sauda. I just claim that Sauda is the translation of Saudade. That is to say that the original doesn't exist, in that sense. In that way, I come to a very interesting friend of mine, Levi Lehto, a very interesting Finnish poet. He translated Ulysses of the James Joyce to Finnish, but he knows wonderful English. He speaks wonderful English, much better than I have a lot of accent. I have a lot of errors, but he's wonderful in English. But he didn't translate Ulysses from English. He used Pentti Sarikoski's Finnish version to translate Ulysses from Finnish to Finnish. In that process, he created another Ulysses. I remember in 2012-13, around that time, when they interviewed him about the fact of the writing translation Ulysses, he said that, of course, Ulysses was written first in Finnish, then Joyce wrote it in. Okay, I completely agree with that. It is in accordance to a sentence that Furugh Farrokhzad, an Iranian wonderful poet, she expressed about readers. She says that I don't know where my readers are. They could exist 3 centuries ago or 2 centuries later. What does that mean? If I could have a reader in 2 centuries later, that's very important question. Excuse me, it seems that I finally could have my computer back, but it doesn't matter. It is a lot of questions. You go through it. Okay. I go to other question. So.
It's okay.
Right, James, there. I finally have it. Okay. So one of the question I started to challenge was the metaphor of the origin and the conception of the translation without the origin. So in my own work, I started to challenge myself, and I continue to challenge myself all my lifetime. You know? For example, around 2012, I decided to burn my Persian poems. My poem written in Persian, to burn what is called original. After a poem has a proper, in my sense, English translation or Spanish translation or any other language, I started to burn the Persian version. You know? Many people told me that you are acting anti-nationalist or anti-this, anti-that, but it was never like that for me. I still love Persian language. I still love many parts of my poetry in Persian. But I wanted to disappear, to make disappear the Persian version of many things, to give the possibility to the translation itself. I say how it's happened. When I had, in 2010, I met a wonderful Spanish poet, which I believe one of the most important poet of the Spanish language, Antonio Gamoneda. And Gamoneda, Cervantes Prize winner, very interesting figure in the resistance and poetry. When I met him, and later on we started to work on some of my poems with his versions in Spanish. So he started to look at some of my poems and telling me that, Mohsen, that way that you stress the word, or that way that you put this word in the beginning, and I guess that no, it doesn't work. You haven't seen the image correctly. Probably it must go to the end. So how a translator or how a version maker can change the word that way? I started to think that, yes, he has the right. He see the vision of my poem much more clear than myself. So he changed that to another part, and I see that, okay, so what I have to do with my Persian? Must change. So through that process, I discovered that most of the time the translation can help what is called so-called original in that sense, you know. And my own translation, my own poetry start to change and change and change, you know. And this process happened in the same time with the subjectivity of the English language. My other translator, Lynn Coffin, which I admire her because I started to know her because of a poet we all share, me and her, Irji Orten, a Czech poet which I translated to Persian, and I wrote an introduction on that poet, naming her and admiring her translation of the Irji Orten. Later on, she turned to be my own translator to English, and then we started working on my poems together into English. So when she was coming to Mexico in my place and working together on those translation things, I discovered that what she says from the subjectivity of the English language on my poetry, yes, she's right. I'm getting to be more focused on that concept or on that object. So what happens there? You have one thing so-called original seen through the light of different subjectivities. The subjectivity of English, the subjectivity of Spanish, the subjectivity of Finnish, the subjectivity of Arabic, and each of them interferes into what is called original. So I decided to submit myself to all the subjectivities existing outside and accept all the shadows and remove what is called the original as an act of resistance for me. And in this sense, also to challenge one simple thing is, where are you from? Where my poetry is from, I don't know. Because at the same time, any language and any subjectivity of the language I lived and worked at them change my own poetry. So that is what I think must happen in the question of the exile there. I most of the time speak of the transforming exile to translation. That is to say that when we are in exile, we are the people who, in a way, according to the situation of the power, we impose ourselves to a destination. But in translation, a destination have the thirst for another person or another language. So it comes to ask, for example, a poem, right? Rilke in Persian, for example. A Czech poet, I say Czech poet, I don't say German poet because he contributed to the German language, but in the terms of the new years of the Germany, all the Nazist state that we are seeing in these years about the immigration, I prefer to return them to the where that they belong in the, because the word is a lot into the metaphor of origin. So when a person comes to speak of the metaphor origin, I have to return him back to the same conception of the origin. It happens to me several times, and I continue to use them as an act of resistance. You know, for example, in German, they speak a lot of the figures like Rilke, like Paul Celan, like Johannes Bobrowski, and they consider them as German poets. And they actually try to remove that they were immigrants. At the same time, the same way that I could be an immigrant in Germany, I'm not lucky, you know. But at the same time, I could be an immigrant here. So what happens there is that Johannes Bobrowski was born in Poland. Or, for example, Paul Celan is Romanian. Or Rilke is Czech. Or Kafka is Czech. So what does it mean to speak of German language without the existence of Kafka, without the existence of Rilke, or without the existence of Paul Celan, without the existence of the Bobrowski? That language is castrated without those existences. The poets gave the possibility to the language to speak, and they came from other originals. You know? So here, the situation of the power most of the time try to cut the deep oppressed original and take all of them consumed by itself. So here, at the same time, in my process of development, I have to think that hiding Persian language of me is correct. Me, myself, hiding my original is correct. I do believe no. No, because I'm not in the position of the emperors. If I was an American writer and now I was ending to burn all my writings in English and I was accepting my Persian version was the correct version, that was okay. But me coming from a defeated country, burning my version is not correct. Is not an act of resistance. You know? So here I started to criticize myself in that sense. You know? I do believe that I will change years, and I'm proud of that I would change in that sense. I accepted that dynamism as a part of my own identity. You know? It's the same question to the whole movements of the resistance, that we must not start and end in our egos. You know? So there, I started to think differently. One of the things that related to my whole story of the creation is the conception of translation. I started to translate the whole world poetry to Persian. That was actually my own refuge. What I burned on myself remained burnt. But after the critique, I started to keep a paper version of the things and giving it to one person in my life to keep those versions, to do not use the same game of the translating myself, even though that's a creative process. So my own Persian version turned to always change the same way that my translation is changing. I used yesterday a story of my friend Antonio Gamoneda of revising his own poetry, first book of his own poetry, in all the times of his years. I also quoted that I saw around 12 versions of one poem of him I translated in Persian, different version of the same poem. So in my case, that would happen. But I have one problem with the establishment remains. The establishment in the end will not accept me versioning myself. For example, Iranian editors or the German editors or the Spanish or any of them, they would not accept that next year I'm going to change the same poem in the same book. So what I have to do with that? That's where establishment fight with a poet who wants to change himself, who wants to make himself better. So in that cases, I started to believe in the digital media in that sense, that the old, I say Christian print media would never work for a person like me who never works as a Christian or Muslim, Abrahamic in general. I don't work on that way to have a book as written book. I don't have that. I'm changing constantly. So I use digital media, and I came to other concept of that, which I believe that they are important and we have to use that. I studied computer science. As my bachelor, I studied computer science, then I continued to other branches, the comparative literature or other stuff. But in the end, I know how to deal with computer science. So I developed an anthology of the Persian poetry, Persian anthology of world poetry, and there I started to revise myself. And on digital world, you can revise yourself, But in print media, which is very Christian, the same way, I don't say it because I am originated, as they say, in the Iranian Muslim culture. No, I say that as Antonio Gamoneda, as Christian Born says, the surfaces Christianized by industries. All the surface of the world are Christianized by industries. Okay, so I don't say that way that print media are Christianized because of Gutenberg or any other person, no. Or this sort of the game between the Islam or Christianity, which are the same. No, I speak of that conception of the out of the religion. So in that sense, I use digital media. But digital media cannot stand in itself. No. So 2012, I remember in Mexico, they asked me, because there was a huge movement at the time about the presidential elections and things like that, they asked me that how you look at the importance of the digital world in the resistance in Mexico. And I was thinking, and so saw that the same crazy thing that happened in Iran in the Green movement or things like that. No, I don't want to that happen to Mexico, but it happened. Unfortunately, this is our story of the defeat after defeat after defeat. But in the end, what happens there is that we don't consider that the media or digital media is an extension to human being or body or organ, not a replacement for human organ. And when we don't look at that, distinction of the extension, not a replacement, we actually come to a castration of the movements. Because people think that when you post something in Facebook or you do something in digital media or things like that, that does mean that your body is not needed anymore because you expressed it. But the expression of that is not an extension of your own body. The body in a street must be extended by digital media, but not must be replaced by digital media. That is what happens in I guess that it's a cognitive error which happens in the looking of the metaphors of the activities in digital media. So here, one interesting thing comes to my mind always when look at that is about in Iran when I do the translation of a poem and I publish it in digital media, does that mean it's finished? No, never, because I have to come back again to my own body and suffer the same pain. When, for example, when I translated Irji Orton poems, I translated in very tragic moments because I had a person very dear to me, Hoda Saber, who had been killed by after a hunger strike in Iran. We was not sharing together the same utopic ideologies, but Iran, his honesty and his transparency and his resistance was always dear to me, and I always admired him as a person. So when I was in Prague and he died, I didn't have any other solution for me to cure myself of his pain but translating a Czech poet called Irji Orton, who was killed when he was 23 by a German Nazi ambulance in Prague, 6 days before the ghetto of the Prague opens. So I translated Orton's elegies to Persian at that time in memory of Hoda Saber. But what happens there is that when I come to revise myself, the publication which I did on digital media, what does it mean revising a pain? I'm coming back again to that pain. I'm trying to revise that pain. How I can do it? If it's possible after 6 years to come back that pain and revise it, truly it was very difficult for me revising and have the same pain I had at the same time I heard the news of Hoda, and that was the motivation of the pain and all the broken statements I had inside the translation, because my way of breath, my respiration system completely was manipulated through my pain at that time. But my pain changed later on, and this change must revise what existed before. So, and also make it better, not to make it worse. At that time, I found that I cannot return back to that translation now. I have to return back to it when I have some pain coming from another origin, somehow similar. I had that pain. One of my closest friends, an Argentinian poet, a writer, he died. And I was horribly feeling because he was the same way in exile and was all his torture. And at the same time, it was my situation, to again return me back to those poems. You don't plan these things. You don't plan these events to happen. But this is how the things works, that a pain connected to another pain. But an Iranian connected to an Argentinian speaks together in a translation in Persian at that time. Probably in whole my poetry, I can say that different countries, different cultures, different exiles, or different resistance at the same time are speaking together in a text. And that way, I develop somehow the way I write. So this is generally what I wanted to say, but we can start and go into questions or readings or things like that.
Readings? Really? It's a democracy, nobody wants to vote or something. Okay, it's been like 50 minutes. We're gonna continue or going for a break?
We can go a break and then come.
Poem first and then go for a break. Yeah, please.
Okay.
Okay, so.
So, I try to read something because the language is in my computer. چی؟ من نشنیدم چی داری میگن.
No, it's okay.
No, it's working still.
Yeah, خاوران?
You have it?
Yeah, we have it.
Because I wanted to read. Okay, because that poem is a long poem, so I prefer to read some very short poems, then go to probably if we have time or we wanted to go some longer poems. I go through shorter poems.
Let's see.
From every loss, a phantasm is born. The daughter that I never had is crying on the rooftop. The poem I never wrote became the paper's nightmare. The daughter I never had reads the poem I never wrote, and it's raining on the rooftop, and the rain washed the paper and took it away. The paper turned into the subject of loss, like my skin, which is lost to me when your hands are not here. Because of their functions, objects will not be repeated. The lighter burns, the pen writes. Your memory occupies objects. Every resistance must transform the functions of objects. It should be possible to write with the lighter and light a cigarette with the pen. Or one could go even farther to where objects reject being in our history, like your eyes reject looking at me on this snowy night when snow burns and the fire is cold. This is when the heart does not beat and the clock beats. Love is when the heart beats and the clock does not beat. Perhaps this simple comparison explains why you glanced at your watch. You knew that waiting is the dense endurance of eternity, and love, the miracle of mortals, makes eternity ashamed, but this does not wait for anybody. The long summer afternoon was going down on coffins and clock towers. The ruins knew, and you did not know, that war makes waiting invalid, and saving life the whole truth. Was she dead? Had she fled without you, or you were not in love anymore? The dead were not answering, the living were escaping, and love from then on beat within the pulsing of a clock. On the other side of the street, a pink dress, soft nakedness. This side, the young smell of death in white sheets. Poetry is not the funeral processions, is not the epiphany behind the curtain. It is the curtain drawn over us. Today, all the turns I took were wrong, and each time I had to go all the way back. Days do not have any other destination but this poem, and I always come too late. Each farewell takes part of the deep with it. Laughter in a struggle to go that far reached the frontiers of the void, floating without gravity. The galaxy of farewell does not have any sun. I can read some longer poems, but I guess that let's. Yeah, I want to read it, but let it after that. Okay.
So, break?
Yes, a break, and then we.
Okay, so we are going for a break, networking, smoking outside, and see you all.
Y el aliento de murga saldrá a redoblar, muchachos esta noche, cada cual sobre su sombra, cada cual sobre su asombro a redoblar.